Hello, I hope you had yourself an amazing day. That is, if you're watching or listening from abroad. And I hope you had yourself an amazing day, an amazing Wednesday. It is the 4th of March. It is the 3rd of April 2024. It's actually the 3rd of April 2024. And it is 1901 East African time. And this is the Black Hot Fire News Update. Where we are going to be looking at each and everything that has been happening throughout the whole of Africa, from Uganda to Senegal to Ghana. We have news from all over Africa. There has been a lot of theatrics going on. Of course, from Egypt with their new president, to Senegal with their new prime minister right now, to Somalia, where some people are refusing to recognize the federal government, to Uganda with its Ugandan Constitutional Court upholding anti-homosexuality law, something we were talking about yesterday, and we were not sure whether the Constitutional Court would uphold the 2023 Homosexuality Act. And I was surprised because it did. It only did away with 4 clauses from the law. I'm going to be telling you about the 4 clauses that the Constitutional Court, the Uganda's Constitutional Court, did away with. And of course, as I was telling you, we're going to be looking at Senegal with President Diomaye Faye appointing Osman Sonko as Prime Minister. That is in his first order of business. Africa's youngest elected leader, the 44-year-old, who was mentored into the political scene by Osman Sonko, who he was in prison together with. So he has appointed him as the new Prime Minister. I'm going to be telling you about that. We're also going to be looking at Ghana and Kenya and how Ghana and Kenya did sign several deals, several trade agreements. And apart from the trade agreements, Ghana endorsed Kenyan opposition leader Raila Odinga for the AU chair job. He has been vying for the AU chairmanship job, and he has a few countries in Africa supporting him, and now Ghana joins the number of countries that are supporting him. It looks imminent. Raila becoming the AU chair looks imminent at this point, considering the amount of support he's receiving and the fact that the AU say that the leader, its chair, has to come from East Africa. So he does not have any serious rival. We are also going to be looking at how the US has flagged Kenya for what it called rampant bribery. That is, it said that it has tried to implement several projects in Kenya, but it wasn't able to do that because of rampant bribe requests and extortion of US firms by Kenyan government officials in order to secure tenders. So this was according to a US trade representative. His name is Ambassador Kathleen Tai. So you are going to be looking at what he said. And apart from that, we are also going to be looking at deeply at the agreements that were signed by Kenya and Ghana. So join me for the next 30 minutes as we look at each and everything that was happening throughout the whole of Africa. So let us start with Kenya and Ghana signing what they call trade agreement. This happened today when President William Ruto met with his Ghanaian counterpart, and they agreed on several things. The agreement, according to what I saw, the agreements that I came across between Ruto and his Ghanaian counterpart, Nana Akufo-Addo. The agreement seeks to expand opportunities for business, the private sector, and people of the two nations. So, in total, Kenya and Ghana signed 7 agreements aimed at enhancing bilateral relations between the two countries. So, this happened in Accra, Ghana today. And the goal, as Ruto said, is to expand opportunities for business, the private sector, and the peoples of the two nations. It includes cooperation in science and technology, cooperation in tourism, cooperation in education, cooperation in finance, and cooperation in defense. Those are among the 7 bilateral agreements that were signed today in Accra by William Ruto, the Kenyan president, and President Nana Akufo-Addo, his Ghanaian counterpart. And William Ruto said, and I quote, "During my discussions with President Nana Akufo-Addo, we have noted that these agreements are significant in the evolution of our diplomatic ties, which stands on warm and cordial, impactful historic collaboration." So Ruto went ahead to commend Ghana's decision to remove visa requirements for all Africans by the end of the year, a move aimed at enhancing the continent's integration. So Ghana, same as Kenya, Kenya did away with visa requirements for all Africans, but Kenya did not do it just for Africans. It did it with almost every country in the world, making Kenya visa free. So anybody who wants to come to Kenya does not need the physical visa. They only need to apply for what was called the e-visa, and that one is easy to get. So Ghana took a similar turn, and it even made it better because it's only doing it for Africans, and it decided that it's going to do away with visa requirements for all Africans by the end of the year, in what President Nana Akufo-Addo said was a move aimed at enhancing the continent's integration. He was talking about how this might bring Africa together. It might bring African unity due to the fact that anybody from Africa, from any African country, by the end of this year, can now visit Ghana without having to have any visa with them. And those are among the 7 agreements that was signed. And lastly, on that, they also discussed Raila Odinga is the Kenyan opposition leader. So he was part of the discussion because, as I had told you earlier, he's vying for the AU chairmanship job. And for you to be elected as the AU chairman, AU commission chairperson, you need to be supported by other leaders, other presidents. So he has been on a trip around Africa, looking for support from. He was in Uganda, and Museveni promised to support him. He went on to, so he has been looking for support from different African leaders. And today he was not even there. It was President Ruto who sought for Ghana's support in endorsing Raila for the AU chairmanship job. That was why I was saying it almost looks inevitable. Raila's win as the AU chairperson looks inevitable at this point, with the amount of support he has been receiving from African leaders, and of course with the fact that the AU said that the chairman has to come from East Africa. So I was looking at who else in East Africa might rival Raila, and I didn't see anybody serious with the popularity and the political muscles that Raila has. So I really doubt anybody's gonna beat him. I can almost guarantee you that he's gonna win the AU chairmanship job. So Ghanaian President Nana Akufo-Addo has endorsed opposition leader Raila Odinga's bid for African Union chairperson, as revealed by President Ruto today. Made the announcement on Wednesday during a state visit to Ghana, aimed at augmenting bilateral ties between Nairobi and Accra. So I've just told you about the 7 agreements that they signed, and Ruto said on 15th March 2024, the African Union Executive Council unanimously decided that the next chairperson of the African Union Commission would be nominated by the East African regional states in accordance with the statute of the AU Commission, the rules of procedure, the African Union policy organs, and decisions of the Assembly of Heads of States and the government. That is why they have been looking for the support of the heads of states, because they're going to be among the people who are going to determine the next AU chairperson. In case you're wondering what the AU is the African Union. It was started a long time ago in the 1970s, late 60s or early 70s, after a meeting that was held in Addis Ababa. But back then it was called the OAU. It was later, the OAU was fully born during the Lagos Declaration. It happened in 1982, if I'm not wrong. I'm getting the numbers from my head, so in case I'm wrong, maybe by a year or two, don't crucify me. So it happened in the 1982s. There was the Lagos conference that they came up with the Lagos Plan of Action. That was when they came up with the OAU. Back then it was called the Organization of African Union. It was later renamed to AU in the early 2000s, the African Union. Its main agenda on paper is to ensure that Africa unites, is to unite African countries and make sure Africa moves in the same direction, that is in matters to do with trade, in matters to do with defense, in matters to do with governance. And when it was born, they came up with what they call the Lagos Plan of Action. The Lagos Plan of Action was supposed to be the guiding principle for the AU. So what was there in the Lagos Plan of Action? A very beautiful plan that, if it had been implemented, if it had been done with the best interest, if it was done with the best interest for the African people, would have taken Africa to a whole new level. I read the document, and I'm not gonna lie, the document is beautiful, and the agenda and everything that has been written in it are things that could benefit Africa. So among the things that they discussed in the Lagos Plan of Action, I'm just giving this as context on where the AU came from, because it was originally the OAU, the Organization of African Union, before it became the AU. So the guiding document for the OAU was the Lagos Plan of Action. It was called the Lagos Plan of Action because it happened it was drafted after a conference that happened in Lagos, Nigeria, in April 1980. I wasn't wrong. So it was a conference that had many African leaders, and the major theme in the plan blamed Africa's economic crisis on the structural adjustment programs of the World National Monetary Fund and the vulnerability of African communities and economies to worldwide economic shocks. So the the Lagos Plan of Action majorly blamed all of Africans' problem on the IMF and World Bank, and rightly so. That is why I said it is such a beautiful document. If you look at it, if you can get time to look at it, it is a beautiful document, but drafted not with the best African interest. So among the things that it looked at was food and agriculture. It looked at how we can enhance food security and improve food production in Africa. That is, it talks about the development of agriculture should not be considered in isolation, but integrated within economic and social development processes. So it was talking about how we should not be looking at food security in Ghana, food security in South Africa as a separate entity, because that way we are not going to achieve food security in Africa. So it talked about having integrated plans that work for the whole of Africa. If you're talking about food security, then we talk about the food security in the whole of Africa. If you're talking about a certain plan to reduce food wasting, increase food security, increase the diversification and food supply, then we should look at it as a unit, as an African unit. And I talked about reducing 50% reduction in post-harvest food losses, because most of they realize that Africa harvests in plenty, but because of some archaic and stupid reasons, we lose about 50% of the harvest. Some of the stupid reasons are pests. You see, we harvest a lot of corns, but a lot of corn is also lost through pests, through diseases. So they were looking to reduce that by 50%. And I told you this was such a beautiful plan, but not drafted in the best interest. The Lagos Plan of Action also talked about industries and how Africa should move towards industrialization, because they realize that least developed regions in the world are the regions that do not have industrialization in them. So the Lagos Plan of Action acknowledged that there was resource limitation in many African states, and it talked about what it called industrial cooperation between member states. That is, countries coming together to build industries. Ghana and Ethiopia coming together, cooperating in having a coffee production plant, instead of Ghana exporting raw coffee berries and Ethiopia exporting raw coffee berries, because maybe Ghana does not have the financial muscles to create a big coffee production plant. So it was talking about, why don't Ghana and Ethiopia come together and build a plant together? So it talked about, due to lack of financial muscles that could allow industrial development in Africa, it talked about industrial cooperations between African states. Congo and Burundi coming together to build a plant that could increase value addition, add value to their natural resources. And as I told you, it was such a beautiful plan because it makes sense to me. African countries coming together to build industries for themselves. We talked about natural resources. That was the third agenda in the Lagos Plan of Action, which was supposed to be the guiding document for the OAU, which later became the AU, and which was part of the discussion today in Accra when President William Ruto went to have a meeting with his Ghanaian counterpart, Nana Akufo-Addo. So in natural resources, the plan recommended that member states should conduct research and store collected data in the National Data Bank. That is, when it talked about conducting research, it talked about knowing the real value of their resources, because the plan acknowledged that many African countries were being finessed because they did not know the real value of their resources. Go to a country, it has cobalt, they don't even know the real value of the cobalt, they don't know the value of the cobalt in the international market, and therefore, despite them being the ones who should have the upper hand in the discussion table, they end up being the ones who do not have the upper, who are the ones who are being intimidated. So talking about conducting research, storing data, and mapping states that have certain resources and coming up together to have what they call the collective management of natural resources in Africa. If it is gold, if you want to buy African gold, you pass through a certain body. You don't go direct to South Africa and finesse South Africa of their gold. If you want to buy cobalt, don't go direct to DRC. If you want to buy whatever you want to buy, we have a collective body. Another beautiful plan. We talked about human resource development and utilization, where we talked about what is it called? This situation where we have all the professionals in Africa being brain draining. You talked about brain draining, where professionals in Africa brain drained to other countries. You look at top engineers in the West, most of them are from Africa. So instead of them developing Africa, they are brain drained to the West, where they go and develop the West. And Africa is left underdeveloped because all our professionals have been exported somewhere else. So that was the other part. And it talked about science and technology, talked about transport and communication, talked about trade and finance, where it was talking about Africa should trade with itself first to contentment. Then it talked about intra-African trade. It's called intra-African trade expansion, where before we export our corn, before Tanzania exports its corn, I don't know to where, let it export its corn to Kenya first. I mean, we should not be exporting food when we don't have enough. We should not be exporting gold when we don't, So it was talking about intra-African trade being the priority before any other trade. It talked about environment and development, talked about energy and how Africa's energy rate was a problem and how they wanted to diversify energy sources. They talked about lack of funding, limited manpower, and how they were going to standardize the energy sector. It was a lot of amazing things. Talked about women and development. I can't go through the whole document. It's a big, big document that was supposed to guard the OAU. The OAU later became the AU in the early 2000s. Did it achieve any of its objectives? I'll leave you to answer that. All the things that I've read, have you had anything that has been achieved? Has intra-African trade been achieved? Is Africa producing enough energy to power itself? Is Africa having enough transport and communication facilities? Is science and technology adequate in Africa? Are we having enough human resource development utilization? Are we having enough industrialization in Africa? Has what they call industrial cooperation between member states, has that been achieved? Can you name a single industry in Africa that is as a result of industrial cooperation between two countries? Can you name an industry that was born out of two countries collaborating, because they have a common interest? Has natural resources management, collective natural resources management been achieved? Has food and agriculture, is food security achieved since I'm talking about 1980? So how many years later? 40 years later, 44? Has anything been achieved? I'll leave you to answer that. That is going to tell you whether Africa has grown, or Africa has progressed, or has it retrogressed. Was the plan of action just another way to, anyway, I don't want to go deeply into that, but that was what was happening. So Ghana has now endorsed Raila as a member, as it's going to support him in his bid to join the list of many African leaders, politicians who have been in the OAU. We have leaders change every few years, but we do not see any change. Not in Africa, not in the OAU, not in the hierarchy, not in the system. But anyway, let us now head to Uganda. And I'm coming back to the comments in a few. Allow me to talk about Uganda first. So yesterday I was talking about how Uganda's constitutional court is going to rule today on whether to uphold or do away with the homosexuality 22. So there is a homosexuality act in Uganda. It is called the Homosexuality Act, Anti-Homosexuality Act 2023. It was passed and it had several tough punishment for homosexuals, including death penalty for what they call aggregated sexual assault on, that had a death penalty, and somebody in Uganda is actually going to there's somebody facing death penalty on the same. And so today Uganda's constitutional court did one amazing thing. It upheld the anti-homosexuality law, did not bow down to pressure from the World Bank, did not bow down to pressure from the West, did not bow down to pressure from the United States, which was pushing a new round of sanctions for Uganda for this law. So I personally said this yesterday. I personally thought Uganda would bow down to pressure. I thought the court was going to do away with the Anti-Homosexuality Act of 2023, but it shocked me. It didn't do away with it. And 7 justices found that some sections of the bill, which was signed into law May last year, violated some rights. So it did away with 4 sections that I'm going to tell you about, but it upheld majority of the bill as it was, including the punishments. The punishments are still going to be there. The capital punishment is still going to be there. So among those that were done with, the 4 sections that were done with was one that required compulsory reporting of homosexuality acts. So if one of the acts stated that if I knew my neighbor was a homosexual, was gay, and I did not report it, then that was a criminal offense. So I had to report them. It was compulsory for me to report. So that was done away, and it said that was contrary to the freedom of the people of Uganda. They did not have to report anything. So that was among the 4 clauses that were done with. And I'll be telling you about the other 3 clauses that it did with, but majorly it upheld majority of the bill was, that is what the other nullified section was. Let me look on the other nullified section. Just give me a minute. The nullified section had criminalized the letting of premises for use of homosexual purposes, the failure by anyone to report acts of some homosexuality to the police. Yeah, that was the one that was done with. The first one was the failure of anyone to report acts of homosexuality to the police was punishable. So that was done with. And the other ones have a lot of technical terms. So it was one of criminalizing the letting of premises. So I have to look for context of the 4. But majorly the bill was upheld as it was, which is something that I commend Uganda for doing, for not bowing down to pressure. Because it had a lot of pressure from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the West, from all over the world. Nobody wanted that. And Ghana did bow down to pressure. President Nana Akufo-Addo bowed down to pressure. And for that, I commend Uganda. So there is a death penalty in the act. for aggravated homosexuality, which is defined as cases of sexual relations involving people infected with HIV as well as minors and other categories of vulnerable people. So any homosexual relation with a minor, with a person infected with HIV, or any vulnerable person is punishable by death in Uganda. And that is, it should be toughened up actually. They should have a death penalty for all of them. For any, it doesn't matter whether it's aggravated. So that was what was happening in Uganda. Let us look at other countries. In Senegal, President Diomaye Faye has appointed Osman Sonko as the new prime minister. In his first order of business, Africa's youngest elected because the other young leader is Traore, who was not elected. So this one is the youngest elected one at 44 years of age. Traore is 35. So he, in his first order of business, he appointed Osman Sonko, who mentored him to the presidency. They were in prison together. Him and Sonko are released about 2 weeks to the election. So he appointed him as the prime minister, and he is now going to be the prime minister of Senegal from now henceforth. So I don't know if that is a good idea. As a human, I understand his perspective, because you always, people who stood with you always have to reward loyalty. And Osman was one person who, Sonko was one person who stood with him. He actually mentored him into the political arena. So from a human's perspective, it is a normal thing to do for you to first reward the people who are with you. And as I said, they were in prison together. They were released 2 weeks before the vote. And let us now wait and see what Osman is going to do. Not Osman, because he's also the prime minister. Let us now wait and see what Diomaye Faye, the president, and Osman Sonko, who has been the opposition figure in Senegal, who people thought was going to be the president before he was barred from contesting. Let us see what is, if they're going to change anything in Ghana really, or it is just going to be another change. You know, as they say, the monkeys are just the same. Even if you change the forests, the monkeys are just the same. And lastly, let us finish with the US, which has flagged Kenyan government officials for what they called rampant bribery requests. So the United States Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai said that they are now not able to implement any project in Kenya because of extortion of US firms by Kenyan government officials. So US firms cannot be able to secure tenders in Kenya anymore because they are being extorted by government officials in Kenya, you know, requesting for huge bribes. So he said that US firms have had very limited success bidding on Kenya's government tenders, with corruption being a significant concern. I don't really care about that. I don't care whether the US gets tenders. I actually want the tenders going back to the Kenyan people. So I really don't care what Catherine Tai is talking about, the US firms getting extorted by leaders, Kenyan leaders, that they are looking for tenders. I don't know why they are looking for tenders in Kenya. Tai says US firms have expressed concerns about the Kenyan government procurement systems, citing insufficient connectivity and technical capacity in county government offices. So American companies have also described Kenyan county government officials as apathetic, adding that there are central control shutdowns and security gaps that render the system vulnerable to corruption, manipulation, and hacking. The US further notes that corruption is a major barrier to doing business in Kenya, as its companies continue to report bribery requests from local government officials. So I'm against the bribing, but I'm also against these companies wanting to take all our, I don't understand why they are here looking for tenders when you have people who can do the same work. If it is a road, we have engineers in Kenya, in Africa, who can do the same roads. So I wouldn't care about whatever she's talking about. The corruption part is not good because it's a disease, and it ends up even affecting our people because the corrupt officials ask for bribes even from Kenyan farms. that are looking for tenders too. So I really how I wish they were only asking for bribes from the international companies and letting the Kenyan farms have an easy time in procuring tenders. So the other thing that Tai talked about was that American companies were experiencing shipment release delays. The ones that got tenders, when they tried importing their shipments to the country, they still were asked for bribes. So they were bribing to get the tenders, bribing to get their shipment released. And for that reason, he said many US companies have commented that Kenya's one-stop custom clearance system. So um, she ended up saying that many US companies now do not want to work with Kenya because of the corruption that is happening there. So for the corruption, I'm not for it, but for denying them the tenders, I'm a big supporter of that. The last thing that she cited, that is why the US government flagged Kenya as a corruption zone, was what she called incredible judiciary. Those are the exact terms she used. She said the judiciary system in Kenya is incredible and it does not resolve any disputes. It delays justice and does not really resolve any dispute that the companies tried to go to the court seeking intervention. You know, when they were asked for bribes and they went to the court seeking for interventions, the courts also asked for bribes. And he notes that there was a case backlog and corruption cases were being postponed and pushed further. And by the time the cases were heard, the tenders were done. And the work that was, So that is why Kenya was flagged as a corruption zone by the United States of America today. So that was all that was happening in Africa today. Not much was happening with Uganda upholding the Anti-Homosexuality Act 2023. Not fully, it did away with 4 clauses, but upheld majority of the bill. So homosexuality is still illegal in Uganda and you are going to get death punishment, especially if you have what they call aggravated homosexuality. It is also a day where President Diomaye Faye has appointed Osman Sonko as Prime Minister. That is the new president of in his first order of business, appointed his counterpart. It is also a day where Ghana and Kenya signed 7 bilateral agreements to do with trade, some of them to do with defense. I read the 7 agreements, so I'm just summarizing what was happening for those who have joined me late. And it's also a day where Ghana has endorsed Raila for the AU chairmanship job. So it looks like Raila Odinga, the Kenyan opposition leader, winning the AU chairmanship job is inevitable. He's going to win it because of the amount of support he's receiving. And of course, he has a lot of political scores. Has been in the political scene since the 80s. And of course knows his way around here and there. He's getting support from President Ruto and of course from other countries in Africa, including Uganda and Rwanda. It is also a day where US has flagged Kenya as a corruption zone, citing rampant bribery requests. So that was all that was happening in Africa today. And a big shout out to everybody who was with me. Let me look at the comments real fast before I end the show. I see Smart. Oh, I'm really sorry, Smart J. I didn't look at the comments earlier. I had seen you're asking to join the conversation. I was looking at the Lagos plan of action and didn't look at the comments earlier. I'll send you the link tomorrow. And Royal Consecrator 000 was also with me, and Jiba Jaba was also with me, and he was saying the US government runs on corruption, and he says the wheels of justice move slow. Money is the grease. Apparently, the US corporations are arguing that for them to get, they're bribing their ways to get the tenders, and then when they go to the courts to report the bribery, they are being asked for more bribes. And when they ship in when they bribe their way to the tenders and they get the tenders, and now they are shipping their equipments to Kenya, they are being asked for more bribes to release the shipments. So they are paying 3 bribes per tender. Now they don't want to do any more business with Kenya. This is the US government runs on corruption, so it doesn't have the moral ground to talk about Kenya being corrupt, considering it's also a corrupt government. And so that was all we had. It is 36 minutes past 7 p.m. Join Joby in a bit. She will be back with, of course, amazing conversation like she always does. So I'll join you tomorrow on the Thursday update, as we'll be looking at what has been happening throughout the whole of Africa. And of course, what was seeing the headlines and what theatrics and dramas did our leaders serve us. So since till tomorrow, hope you enjoyed the rest of your day. Jiba Jaba, Smart J, Royal Conscriptor, and everybody else was watching silently. And of course, everybody else who's going to watch this news update later. So enjoy the rest of your day. It's always a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen.